remember from the previous lesson.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone who around? Right, apart from the factors, we also looked at, as we looked at the mobility of factor of production. Can we have someone share with us what he or she remembers about, or what she or he can contribute about mobility of the factor of production? We know what mobility is. Mobility comes from mobile. And we know what a factor of production is. Anyone share with us what he or she thinks mobility of a factor of production means? Oh, in the chat, we have someone, Pamela, talking of mobility of land. I think that is one of what we covered. Thank you, Pamela. Maybe you would like to tell us what mobility of land means. When land is mobile, when do we consider land mobile? And when do we consider it immobile? All right, briefly, we talked of mobility of factor of production, and mobility of a factor of production is the ease of a factor of production move from one geographical area to another, or move from one occupation to another. So remember, we talked of our factors of production being the land, labor, capital, and others. So when we talk of mobility of the factor of production, we mean the ease of the factor of production to move either from one geographical area to another, or from one occupation to another. So therefore, mobility involves the factor of production changing its occupation or the workplace. Whenever we talk of mobility, it involves mobility of the factor of production. It will involve a factor of production either changing the occupation or changing the workplace. And apart from mobility of the factor of production, we also looked at mobility of labor. Mobility of labor, it doesn't change so much. What changes is that under mobility of the factor of production, we weren't specific, but this time we are specific, talking about the factor of production as labor. So in this case, you will say mobility of labor refers to the degree of ease with which labor can move from one occupation or from one geographical area to another. So under mobility of labor, we look at the degree labor, these are individuals, they are workers, the degree of ease for that person move from one occupation to another, or move from one geographical area to another. And we said that this mobility of labor is divided into two. We also hear it in the definition. It is divided into two, that is geographical mobility and occupational mobility. So when we look at mobility of labor, it can be geographical mobility or occupational mobility, meaning labor can decide to carry on geographical mobility, or that is moving from one workplace to another, or decide to carry on occupational mobility. So today we are going to look at this. We are going to look at geographical mobility of labor. I hope everyone can see my screen. Are you able to see my screen, Esther, Dorcas, David? Can I hear from you?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right. So we are looking at geographical mobility of labor, and before we look at it in details, I would like us to watch some video. Then you will share with us what you've learned from that video, and after we shall look at what I have in the slides. So get prepared, at least get some maybe causes of geographical mobility of labor from the video. Then after you share with us.
Videos on the labour market. And this time we're focusing on geographical mobility and immobility of labour. Geographical mobility is the ability of people to move around an area, a region, or a country in order to find work. And as we'll see, geographical mobility is affected by many factors, such as family ties, transport networks, transferable qualifications, and common languages. One of the barriers to people finding work in the UK and many other countries is geographical immobility. Now, there are many reasons why immobility may well exist. Here are some of the most common ones. In no particular order, one of the key barriers to movement is the existence of family and social ties. Typically, younger people tend to be more geographically mobile. They don't necessarily have those well-established networks and ties which might keep them in an area. The second factor is the financial expense involved in moving home, the cost of putting a property up for sale, for example, and the cost of removals. Not every employer is willing or able to meet some or all of the costs of moving. A key factor, which we'll look at in more detail in a second, is the significant regional and often local variation in property prices. A major barrier to people moving is the lack of affordable property to buy, as well as the high cost of renting a suitable quality property. Another barrier to mobility is the cost of living varying between regions, for example, between Scotland and London, and also between countries. Living costs will vary across countries, as do tax and pension systems. Geographical mobility might also be affected by the extent to which a country introduces migration controls, the barriers to free movement. This, of course, will become a key issue in terms of Britain's renegotiation with the economic union in Europe, the extent to which free movement will become a thing of the past in the UK. There are often cultural and linguistic barriers to living and working overseas, for example. And if you want to bring some behavioral economics into the discussion, there's a strong default towards staying where you are, staying in the place that you know. Typically, people who have been in an area for some time have a dislike of change. That includes the location of your job. As we've said, the housing market is really key to understanding this topic of geographical immobility. This chart shows average house prices for UK countries and regions, and it's taken from October 2015. And look at the chasm, the enormous difference between the average price in London, which is now over £500,000, the average price in In Wales, for example, or Scotland, or the North East, less than £200,000. Average house prices in London are now more than twice the UK average. And this is a significant barrier to mobility. People who want to move, for example, to the southeast to London to find work, find that they can't afford to. And people who live in high price areas may be reluctant to move. They may want to stay and gain from continued house price inflation. Housing unaffordability is a major barrier to geographical mobility. And it's not just the price of buying a house, it's also the cost of renting. Our final slide shows a comparison between the average monthly cost of buying a home for first-time buyers versus the monthly cost of renting a property in the UK. And the data takes us from 2009 through to the summer of 2015. Now, hopefully you can see from this data that the ratio has changed in favour of cheaper costs for buying versus renting. Take 2015 as an example. The average monthly cost of buying a 3-bedroom house in the UK was £666 per month. That's for first-time buyers. The monthly rental cost was £722. A lot of students in their exams talk about the high house price effect being a barrier to labour mobility. And that's correct, it's important. But you might get extra kudos for saying that actually the bigger problem in the UK is the high cost of renting. 20% of people now live in private rented property. And high rental costs, which are themselves a product of high house price inflation, are perhaps the biggest single barrier at the moment to geographical mobility of labour.
All right, hope you picked something from that video. Basically talking about the geographical immobility of labor. So the opposite of mobility of labor is immobility. If labor can move, if labor is able to move from one geographical area to another, then that is geographical mobility. If labor cannot move from one geographical area to another, then that's considered to be geographical immobility of labor. What do you think are the causes of geographical immobility of labor? Why do you think labor would not be able or would not want to move from one geographical area to another? From the video, we've seen that. Can you share with us? You can either write in the chat or you unmute the mic and then share with us. What do you think are the reasons why labor wouldn't want to move from one geographical area to another? Alvin, you had something to share with us? David?
We have strong family and social ties.
Yes. Thank you, Asimwe.
Barriers to geographical mobility, I think ignorance of existing job opportunities because of the low or limited job advertisement. So if this group of if this particular group of labor or maybe one of them doesn't know that there's another job that exists, he can't move from one area to another.
Perfect, thank you. Any other? David?
We have high cost of renting a suitable property.
Okay, thank you so much. We have high cost of living at alternative place from Lynn. Thank you. From D, we have better working conditions at the current job. So you find that all these reasons can actually prohibit labor from moving from one area to another. All right. If no other suggestions or inputs, we can look at what we have here. Briefly, before let's look at the definition for geographical mobility of labor. Can we have someone read for us the definition?
This refers to the degree of ease with which labor can move from one geographical area to another. For example, a nurse from Zambia Hospital moving to Masaka Hospital, but still as a nurse.
Thank you. So from this, we all get to know well what geographical mobility of labor is. You only change the workplace, but you do not change the occupation. You do not change what you're doing. So the example here, we have a nurse who is working in Zambia Hospital. If this nurse decides to migrate from Zambia to Masaka, then that is going to be considered as geographical mobility of labor. So we look at the causes. What do you think are the causes of geographical mobility of labor? We can look at one by one here. Dorcas, can you read for us the first cause?
High wages high wages in other geographical areas.
So we are looking at thank you, Dorcas. We are looking at the causes of geographical mobility, not immobility. So you take a note of that. So we are looking at what could be the causes of one moving from one geographical area to another. Why do you think a nurse would want to move from Zambia Hospital to Masaka Hospital? So these are the causes we are looking at. And the first one is high wages in other geographical areas. So if you find that the wage rate at your current workplace is very low, if you compare it to the wage rate that is paid in other workplaces, and you see that the other workplaces are actually paying highly, you would like to you would automatically consider migrating from that workplace to another. So high wages in other geographical areas, in other, not in your current workplace. So if you find out that the wages in other geographical areas are high, then this will automatically cause geographical mobility of labor. So the next cause here, we have high cost of living in the current workplace. If the cost of living in the current workplace is high, you will consider geographical mobility. You go to the place where the cost of living is not high. Take an example. If let's continue with the example of a nurse in Zambia Hospital. If this nurse is able to access a kilogram of sugar at 5,000, yet in Masaka it is at 2,000. That is one. If the rent for the houses in Zambia, they range from 500 to millions, and then you consider the ones in Masaka, that is 400 maybe and below. So if this nurse considers all the costs of living and finds out that Masaka is actually cheaper, it might cause the geographical mobility. So this will lead to migrating to Masaka Hospital due to the cost of living. So the cost of living will also determine the mobility. If the cost of living is high at the current workplace, then this will lead to geographical mobility to the place where cost of living is actually low. We also have the government policy of transferring civil workers. This is another cause of geographical mobility. Some labor actually are transferred not because they want, but because it is the government policy. For example, the civil workers are transferred now and then. So you find that this will cause geographical mobility of labor. Then better working conditions in other geographical areas. If you consider the working conditions in other geographical areas and find out that they are actually better, the working conditions, it might include the meals, the health wise in that workplace, the relationship, the social relationship with the people around the bosses. So if you find that the environment is favoring you and the working conditions are actually better, then you will consider migrating to those geographical areas where the working conditions are better. But if you find that the working conditions at your current place are actually better than those in other geographical areas, then that will lead to immobility. It means you will not move from that current workplace due to the better working conditions in that workplace. I've talked a lot. Someone read for us this point. Yes, Ashanat.
Political instability of the current geographical area.
Yeah, we are still looking at, thank you, Ashanat. We are still looking at the causes of geographical mobility. So we look at political instability at the current geographical area. So you find that if you find that there are instabilities in your current geographical area, then this will automatically cause the mobility of labor from that area to an area where there is political stability. So take an example, if we have some chaos, some crises and some wars that are taking place in Wakiso district, you find that all the workers that are around Wakiso, that are in Wakiso district, will opt to geographically move from Wakiso to other districts, be it Masaka, Lila, other districts where the environment is stable, where those areas are politically stable. So the instability in the current geographical area will also cause geographical mobility of labor, because no one would like to work in an environment where political status is unstable. Can we have that other cause from anyone? Ashanat, your hand is still up. David, yes.
Improvement in the transport and communication network in other geographical area.
Thank you. The other cause that will actually lead to geographical mobility is the improvement in the transport and communication network in other geographical area. So if the transport and communication network in other geographical areas are improved, then some workers will opt to move from the current area to those areas where communication network is better. If you take an example of us, the IT specialists, you find that the communication network is very vital in your occupation, in whatever you do. So if you do not have a stable network, you will not be able to carry on your activities. So if you find that in the current area you're actually living in is poor in network, you will opt to move to other areas where the network is stable. Lastly, we look at the light migration laws. So this will also cause to geographical mobility of labor. If there are no strict laws in migrating, then you will be able to move from one area to another. Currently, you're not allowed to move from one district to another, so that is the law already. So if you want to move from one district to another, you will not be able to, due to the strict laws that are currently in the country. But if those laws are not around and you're able to move, then if you want to move from one geographical area, you will be able to do so. So the laws also contribute. Jen, can you unmute your mic? Can you mute your mic? Sorry, you mute your mic. We are getting some noise from. Thank you. Yeah, we were looking at the light migration laws. So if there are no migration laws around you, it will also cause to the geographical mobility. But if there are laws like now, you can't move from one district to another, then that is geographical immobility. You're not able to move. Yeah, I think we can look at the barriers unless you have a question on the causes. Any question about the causes of geographical mobility before we move on to the barriers? Esther Asimwe.
Teacher, I would like to ask if the causes of geographical mobility are the same as the determinants of geographical mobility, or there's a difference somewhere.
Thank you. Here's a question, causes and determinants. Determinants of geographical mobility, and then causes of geographical mobility. Okay, the points can be the same. However, you will need to twist a bit. You will need to change the explanation and the phrasing of the points. Can you give us one example, one cause of Esther, give us one cause of geographical mobility. I show you how to phrase the determinants. One of the causes we talked of.
High cost of living in the other area, in the other geographical area.
Thank you. So you see that the cause of geographical mobility is phrased as high cost of living. So whenever they ask you for a determinant in any question, make sure that your point is phrased in a neutral way. For example, that point of high cost of living, you do not need to say high cost of living if you're answering a question of determinant. You'll just say cost of living. Then in the explanation, you will need to show when the cost of living is high, this will happen. When the cost of living is low, this will happen. So whenever you come across a question asking for the determinant, you will need to phrase your points in the neutral. You do not need to phrase it in either the negative way or the positive way. Then in the explanation is where you bring out the both sides. We look at the other example. We can talk of also we talked of high wages in other geographical areas as a cause. So if you want to phrase it as a determinant, the point will be wage rate. Then in the explanations, you will say high wages will lead to high wages in other geographical areas will lead to mobility. Then high wages in the current will lead to immobility, or low wages in other geographical areas will also lead to immobility. I don't know whether I'm clear.
Yes, you are. Thank you. Thank you so much, teacher.
Welcome. Any other question before we look at the barriers? Okay, what we've looked at are the causes of geographical mobility. However, there can be barriers to geographical mobility. So you can also take a note that the causes of geographical mobility can be the barriers to geographical immobility. Then the causes of geographical immobility can be the barriers to geographical mobility. You get me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah. When you look at the causes of geographical mobility, what we've covered before, those are the barriers to geographical immobility. Then here we look at barriers to geographical mobility. You can see in the brackets we have causes of geographical immobility. So whatever is prohibiting the labor from moving from one area to another is actually a cause of geographical immobility. That's why we have it in the brackets. Right, so we look at the barriers. What could prohibit labor from moving from one place to another, from one workplace to another? The first point is there. I want Pamela, can you read for us that point?
High transport costs that are involved in traveling from one place to another, thereby making labor decide to keep in the current place of work.
Thank you. So one of the barriers to geographical mobility is the cost, the high transport costs. So if the transport costs are high, then it will force labor remain in the current workplace. So take an example of labor who wants to move from Wakiso to which district now, or to which area? Maybe to Gulu, Rukunjili, Mbalala, that side. During this current period. So the current situation in Uganda, the transport costs are very high. And if you consider it will prohibit labor from moving from wherever they are to other areas. And costs being high, they are also scarce. The transport means that are scarce. Be the factor that you are not even allowed to move from one district to another. So the high transport costs will actually hinder labor from moving from one area to another, so that labor will decide keep in the current workplace. Another barrier, can we have it from Mary? Mary, can you read for us the second barrier? She's not on. Dorcas, can you read for us, please? Anyone ready to read for us that point?
high cost of living in the alternative places of work. This makes people fear to move to such areas.
Thank you. High cost of living in the alternative places of work. So if labor find out that wherever he or she wants to to migrate to, the cost of living is high, then that will actually impart fear in them. So those people will not be able to move from one geographical area to another, since the cost of living is high. If you're earning 800,000 and the rent is 700,000, then you won't be working anything. So you will opt to remain in the current workplace where the cost of living is low. So if the cost of living is high in other alternative workplaces, then labor will opt to remain in the current workplace. So there is also this point of family ties. Family ties. So if you have some family ties, you find that you're not able to move from one geographical area to another. Family ties to the current geographical area. That is to say, many people don't want to leave their home areas, especially when they have family members who require their support and attention. So if you have some family ties, they will actually tie you in the current geographical area. So you will not be wanting moving from your home area to another area due to those family ties. Maybe you have some responsibilities in that home area, so you will not be able to move from that area to another. We look at the strict national and international migration laws. Can we have someone read for us that point? Ashanat?
Strict national and international migration laws and requirements. For example, passports, visas, working permits, etc., all of which makes workers become reluctant to move to other geographical areas.
Thank you. Thank you. So if the migration laws are strict, these workers will not get interested in migrating from the current areas to other areas. So if you find that the national and international migration laws are very strict, that will include maybe getting a passport is very difficult, getting a visa is very hard, accessing a working permit from other geographical areas is very hard. So you find that these workers are going to get reluctant, and therefore they will not be able to move from one geographical area to another. So apart from the strict national laws and international laws, we have other barriers. And there we go. Richard, can you read for us that barrier? Richard, are you reading? We can't hear you. Oh, it's only me who is not hearing him.
I'm very sorry because I'm very
Richard, your network is not good. We've not gotten you well. Can we have someone else read for us that point?
Ignorance of labor about the existence of job opportunities in other regional areas, in other geographical areas.
Thank
of
you.
labor about the existence of job opportunities in other geographical areas.
All right, thank you. So the other point, the other barrier is ignorance of labor about the existence of other job opportunities in other geographical areas. So if these workers are ignorant about the existence of job opportunities in other geographical areas, they will not be able to move to those geographical areas because they are not aware that there are actual job opportunities in those areas. So this will lead to geographical immobility of labor. You do not have any knowledge about the existence of other job opportunities. You will not go to those job opportunities because you apply for a job after getting some knowledge that there is a vacance or there is an opportunity in that area. So if you do not get to know there is that opportunity, you will not be able to move to that geographical area or to apply to that job in that geographical area. The other barrier is, can you have someone read for us that other barrier?
About of job in other geographical areas is labor is reluctant to move to places of political instability because of the fear of loss of rights and property.
Thank you, Richard. The other point is political instability in the alternative places of work, and that is to say labor is reluctant to move from that place to a place where the political status is unstable. So, and this is brought by the fear to lose their lives and their properties. So you do not expect labor move to areas where political status is unstable. So that is also a barrier to geographical mobility. You want people move to some geographical area, the political status should be stable. So the political instability in those areas will prohibit them move to those areas. The other barrier can be poor housing facilities in the alternative places of work. If the housing facilities in the alternative places of work are poor, you do not expect labor move from their current workplaces to those places where the housing facilities are poor. They will be reluctant to move to those areas because such areas will be lacking decent accommodation. So everyone would like to stay in a better accommodation. So if the working places have gotten no decent accommodation, then workers will not move to such areas. Can we have our other barrier read by who? Anyone who is ready. Read for us that barrier of old age.
Old age, i.e., old people develop body weakness that makes them unable to move from one place to another.
Thank you, Ashana. So, if you look at the geographical mobility of labor, the range is very high with youths. With old, they are actually not interested in moving from one workplace to another because, first of all, they are weak. They do not prefer moving from one geographical area to another. So the old age is also a barrier to geographical mobility of labor. Old people will not be able to move from the current workplace to another. We also have permanent investment as another barrier. If you have your permanent investments in the current workplace, you will not prefer moving from that workplace, leaving your investments there. You will prefer living around to monitor and supervise your investments. So this is another barrier and another cause to geographical immobility. If labor set up their permanent investments in an area, you do not expect that labor go work very far, leaving the investments there. So that's another barrier to geographical mobility. We also have apathy among certain people, and in this we look at the uncomfortableness of workers move from one geographical area to another, where there are new tribes, where there are new religion, races, and so on. So you find that some people feel uncomfortable working places with people who are not of their tribe and who are not of their skin color. So some people actually do not move to other areas because of that. They want to work in places where people that are in those places are of the same skin color, they are of the same tribe, they are of the same religion, and so on. So leading to geographical immobility. And here comes another barrier. Someone read for us that barrier of the working conditions.
Good working conditions in the current geographical area, and therefore labor feels comfortable to stay in such places.
Thank you. So the good working conditions, you make sure that you include that word good. The good working conditions in the current geographical area will make them comfortable and therefore they will not move from one geographical area to another because the working conditions are good. There is no reason for them to get transferred or to move to other geographical areas. So that will actually be a cause of geographical immobility and a barrier to geographical mobility. All right. Thank you so much. Can we have some questions? If you have some questions about what we've looked at.
Uh, okay, teacher, to me, I just like I'm asking you to help me and go back and explain about geographical immobility because